Welcome to the Mike Litton Experience Podcast. Mike has over 31 years experience in real estate, finance, and investing. He's passionate about being a father, a teacher, a realtor, an investor, and a leader. Everyone has a story, and our passion is to help them tell it. And now, introducing the host of the Mike Litton Experience, Mike Litton.
So what can you expect from the Mike Litton Experience? You can expect stories that will inspire, motivate, advice that will sharpen your focus, and expert information on real estate, finance, and market conditions.
Kill your family, who, by the way, we have right now in our custody. And so this is happening at scale, right?
They're going door to door. It's like, I mean,
yeah.
Oh.
And I actually have a scene in my play that is I call it a coda. It's a scene that I wrote that's only been in a few of the shows, but at the end of the play, my character's son, Caden, ends up joining Special Forces, and the lights go out at the end of the play, and then you hear this news flash of an attack on the homeland again, and U.S. Special Forces are inbound to return to Afghanistan. And what you see is the character Caden is now, the lights come up and he's rolling his parachute up, and there's an Afghan commando. He's an actual interpreter that we brought in. He's an actor, and he's in these tattered commando garb. He's got his carbine with his tricked out optics, and he's just in rags, and he's got this furious look on his face, and he's got the drop on Caden. And he looks up, and they have this standoff, because now Caden, this young Special Forces soldier who never has been to that country, he now has to answer to that pissed off commando who was left behind and whose family has been slaughtered. Right. So not only have we created, in my mind, more highly capable terrorists who have been probably co-opted or coerced, but you have also created a condition to where when the attack does happen on the homeland, and it will, and we go back for retribution with our country music songs and our Budweiser commercials and all of America putting yellow ribbons out, because that's how we roll. Our sons and daughters are going to be facing that pissed off commando who I trained, and who was left on the side of the road to die. And he is going to have his say.
And nobody in leadership thought this through.
No one's talking about it.
Nobody in leadership cares, because they don't think they're going to be affected. And this thing's gonna come home to roost. It's going to happen. I'm telling you, it's going to happen.
I told Pete
this better than I do.
I told Pete Hegseth, the dashboard, as Congressman Mike Waltz said, is not just blinking red; it's smoking.
Yeah, I agree with you. So let's talk about, if it's okay, let's talk about the new book. Oh, actually, hold on, real quick. Is Last Out still touring?
All right. So here's the deal. We wrapped up Last Out with the original cast in May of 2024. Right. And we performed it in Staten Island for a bunch of 9/11 first responders. It was pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Tunnel to Towers sponsored it. It was so special.
That's awesome.
And then that was it for me. I decided, you know what? I've done this for 2 tours now. I'm actually working on a surprise one-person show that maybe we can talk about some other time when I get a little further developed. But I thought, man, we really still need this play out there. People are hurting, and we need to tell the story. So what we've decided to do is we're putting a new cast together. We just finalized casting today. It's a brand new cast of younger veterans and military family members. It looks like we may even have 2 traveling teams. This year, it will include also a Gold Star sister playing Lynn. It will include an Afghan interpreter. So we just continue to expand the envelope on who's represented in the cast. And we're going to tour all over the country, Mike, in 2025. We haven't announced the tour schedule yet. If anybody watching this, and I'm not kidding, I don't know how we could set it up where they could get in touch with me. Let's figure that out. But if they want to explore bringing the tour to their town.
Okay.
Look, I'll just say, send me an email, Scott@scottmann.com.
Yeah. Well, they can send it to me and I'll get it to you.
Yeah, get
Yeah,
it to
for
me.
sure.
But we're open. We're setting the tour schedule right now. It's about a 20 to 25K price tag to bring it into a theater, but it's a powerful show. And yeah, we're going to start rehearsals I think next week.
That's awesome.
I'm so excited, and I'm excited to actually sit in the audience and watch the show. It's been 7 years in development, and so now to just sit there as the playwright, and just with the pride that I know I'm going to feel for this amazing cast, and I'm excited to see a younger group of actors taking the helm.
That's going to be cool, man. The new generation takes over. I love it. That's cool. Hey, if we can help with that, I'd love to have you back on to talk about it. If we can help with it, I'm all in. So you let me know.
How about this?
I'll do whatever I need to do.
How about this? How about if we maybe a little bit later in the game, let's put a pin in me coming on, because we'll have the show locked down by then.
Yeah.
And I also think I'll have some good insights onto the one-person show that I'm doing.
Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah, but I'll drop a hint. The one-person show I'm doing is around Pineapple Express.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Hey, is it Nizam that's in Dallas?
Yeah, he's in.
How's he doing?
Well, he's out. He's actually kind of out in the country. I think he's doing good. I think he's doing really good. He's he doesn't like to be in the public eye at all.
Yeah.
He's been through a lot, and so he likes to just be with his kids and his family. And but I feel like he's done really well. He's assimilated. To me, really, he's a case study for resettlement in so many ways. I don't think we've done right by him in terms of his trauma and a lot of the medical issues that he's encountered, because so many of these think about it, these Afghan soldiers that came here, they lost 100,000 Afghan soldiers in the war. 100,000, for an institution that didn't fight, that's a lot of dudes, and a lot more were wounded, and they have no health care, they have no VA type organizations, and even the commandos that are here, these guys are driving Ubers and just trying to make ends meet, and they can barely deal with their, with the trauma, the traumatic brain injuries, the PTS. And I feel like there was a study not too long ago by More in Common of Afghan war veterans, and it was something like 70% of Afghan war veterans felt like the resettlement of their Afghan allies was directly proportional to their own mental health. And I think as we start to talk about the moral injury that came from abandoning our allies, and just the noticeable silence of our generals and admirals, who, by the way, the retired ones too. What are we doing to help our Afghan allies heal and become whole and resettle in America in such a way that they're not just living in a hotel and living the nightmare of, I just can't even imagine what they're going through with no treatment for their PTS, no medical care at all to speak of. That is inexcusable to me, to bring our partners over like that. And so where's that discussion? And it's not an easy problem, but I think the mental health of the global war on terror generation of veterans is directly proportional to our ability to answer that question.
I agree with that. 100%. I agree with that. Okay. So we need to work on that. We need to get that figured out. We'll work on it. So let's talk about Nobody's Coming to Save You. A Green Beret's guide. There we go. Hold it up proud. A Green Beret's guide to getting what done, right? Big done, right?
Yeah.
So this is an amazing book. Absolutely amazing book. Best part that I think is the blurb plus in the beginning from Mike Rowe. I just love that guy. But I also really, really love the churn, the human operating system, lead from the rooftop. What I'd like to do, if it's okay, is just let's go chapter by chapter and talk a little bit about each chapter, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure.
You're on to something here. And I shared that with you before we hit record. You have an insight because of all of your experience and everything that you've done, and your ability to lead has helped you. And you're on something here. You're on sort of this disconnect that people are feeling, and that there are a lot of people that are feeling lost. You talked about social media, and you talked about the last 10 years. You're right on, by the way. I mean,
thank you.
We're completely addicted to our phone. Yeah. We're completely addicted to the social media thing. I mean, I know I am, and it's affecting our decision making. It's affecting our psyche. It's affecting, like you're talking about, our mental health, right? So talk for a second about the churn.
Right. So the antagonist or the enemy in the book, and this is what I learned as a Green Beret, is not the tribal elder sitting across from you. It's not it's not even the ticked off villager who's screaming at you, right? It's what I call the churn. It's a set of social conditions that are unprecedented and novel. Well, in the last 5 to 10 years, that statement could now be migrated to the United States. The enemy is not the Republican or the Democrat. It is not the mask or no mask individual, although it feels like they're the enemy. The enemy is the churn, this novel, unprecedented set of social conditions that we face today that we didn't face 10 years ago. And I talk to people all the time, Mike, and they say, yeah, man, it just feels different. Like there's something going on. I can't quite put my finger on it. That's the churn. And the way I kind of frame the churn out is it's the perfect storm, right? It's this roiling set of social conditions that it's all around us, and it catches us, it gets us caught up. But the couple of things that are the highlights of it is, first of all, what I call the 4 Ds. Everywhere you look, people are distracted, they are disengaged, lacking purpose, they are disconnected from themselves and their own human nature, and they're distrustful, right? So there's all of that going on. And as a result of that, a lot of what we're dealing with because of these phones and the 24/7 news network, we are inundated with just this environment that is not even the natural world. It's not the natural world. And what it does is it induces at a biological primal level fear and anger. And when we do that, we're still primal creatures. We're still 250,000 years old. We go into what I call, or Ivan Tyrrell calls, a trance. The body, if you think about when you've been scared, or when there was an emergency situation, or even when you heard a great story, the body goes into a hyper-focused state to do whatever it needs to do without conscious thought. And we do it all the time. That's where the term seeing red comes from. When we're angry, we go into a semi-conscious trance state. Well, so many of today's leaders at political levels, media, corporate, I call them divisionists. They are, instead of being stewards of bringing us together from our different groups and races like we used to do as a country, out of many come one, they have now become divisionists. They are focused on fomenting instability, right, across different groups to advance a very narrow agenda. And when they do that, it creates this fear-based response in us where we go into a trance, and we cycle back into the people that look like us, think like us, believe like us, because it's safer. And it's the most primal response we can get. And it creates this kind of shadow tribalism where you have all of these different groups in the country actually at war with each other. And the leaders are actually fomenting that. And that's where the premise of that's the churn. And so the premise of my book is, you got to look at that and go, okay, what if none of them are coming to save me? What if they're actually irresponsibly leading us off a cliff? But you can still get big stuff done. You can still lead through that, and you can even change that outcome. But if you're waiting on somebody else to come save you, you're actually probably in that trance state, or headed to that trance state, where you're just going to go off the cliff with everybody else.
And you've got to fight through it, right?
Got to work through it.
You've got to absolutely give it everything you've got to get out of that churn, so that you can go make things happen, because otherwise you're trapped, right? And
I talk about that in the book. I give tips on even how to use diaphragmatic breathing. Because you are in a trance state. The body is in a hyper-focused state. So think about when you're really angry. If you go work out, if you go do functional movement, if you do 5 to 7 diaphragmatic breaths, you will go from a sympathetic state of fight, flight, or freeze, and you'll drop into a parasympathetic state of calm and connect. And you actually are ready to listen to the other party. This is what we've got. This is what we teach Green Berets. This is what I teach federal law enforcement. And now, unfortunately, I'm having to teach moms and dads and school teachers.
And you're going to have to continue to do it. And we're going to continue to do it together, you and me. So 2 things that you brought up. One was a Facebook friend that got rid, that blocked the other Facebook friend. They'd been friends for years.
30 years.
Lifelong friends, right? And another thing was this CEO that got up in front of the group. You were asked to come in and speak. They got up in front of the group, and he started through his slide deck, and he got to the first or second slide of the slide deck, and they're looking at their phones. They're looking at other things. They're completely distracted. That's the thing so this morning, I'm on my way to my workout. Okay.
Yeah.
And I see a road rage incident and I thought of you.
Yeah.
I literally thought of you. I'm like, this
Right.
person's stuck in the churn, man.
Right. And the cool thing is, I'm glad to hear you say that, because this is the first thing that I want people to do, is to recognize, when you recognize the churn as the enemy, you immediately reclaim a lot of your own agency.
Yeah.
Because when now you're not assigning the enemy to an individual, you're assigning it to a set of conditions, and you're like, all right, well, I've got to manage my own emotional state here, because you're watching that road rage. Now, if you were to go over and try to like deal with that, it's very possible that it's like trying to save a drowning person.
Yeah.
You can get sucked in.
Yeah.
So a lot of this is an informed understanding of these churn-like conditions, and how do I manage the emotional temperature of myself and those around me. Now, you think about the two cases that you just said, the Facebook friend, Mark, who lost his buddy. I challenge anybody watching or listening to this to not be able to think of an example where that's happened to somebody you know on social media, maybe yourself, where we've literally witnessed an unfriending in action. Now, unfriending is another verb that is characteristic of the churn. When you and I were kids playing on the block, we might get ticked off at Billy down the block and unfriend him, and we wouldn't talk to him, but we'd probably end up playing with him again the next day. Right? Not my friend anymore. Oh, yeah. And then tomorrow you're back hanging out again. But now, friends for decades will literally unfriend. It is a verb. And the worst part about that verb is we've normalized it. Now, when we see it happen, we don't even think about it.
Yeah. Not only that, there are people that take pride in it, Scott.
Absolutely.
There are people that actually beat their chest and take pride in the fact that
if you don't like this post, then unfriend me. How many times have you seen that?
Yeah.
And that is a call of shadow tribalism right there, right?
Exactly what it is.
And then as far as the guy on his phone, I challenge anybody in corporate America, when you go into an event and you're watching a senior leader speak, check out how many phones are out underneath the table.
Yeah.
You know, and the average attention span of an adult in the West today is something like 8 seconds.
Yeah.
And it is not a foregone conclusion that you're going to hold the attention of a room for more than 10 seconds.
Yeah.
And so senior leaders no longer rate the ability for their people to listen to them just because they're the boss. In fact, you're probably the very person they're going to blow off first.
Exactly. And here's the thing. That's why questions are the bedrock of human communication. Because if you're up front and you're their leader and you're asking them questions, right? They're engaged. They're literally programmed from the womb to answer questions. So if you keep asking them questions and you keep getting them to interact with you, and you don't need many, you only need a couple in a group of even 4,000. I experienced this, right?
Yeah.
But you get a couple of them, because it's the mob mentality. You get a couple of them to connect with you. You get a couple of them to converse with you and interact with you. You've got them.
It's called mental coupling.
Absolutely.
And it's actually a real phenomenon, because humans are social creatures. And if when you may not be to it yet, but when you get to chapter 7 and 8 on struggle, storytelling and struggle, that's another thing that I encourage leaders, is to be generous with your scars, to repurpose your struggles in the service of others when you're engaging, because it makes you immediately relatable. It's a trust accelerant. And this isn't kumbaya stuff. Like everything that I talk about in this book, that I build around what I call the human operating system, Green Berets have been studying this, because when we go into tribal places and that elder is tickling the trigger of his AK-47 trying to decide if he's going to dispatch me or not, I have 5 minutes or less to make a connection, and that's it. And so I have to get it right. So we pull out all the stops on the neuroscience and the techniques. And what I tell people, what I've put into this book is a 30-year body of work where there's no theory. This is stuff that I've done firsthand or witnessed firsthand, that I've taught people to do. And what works in life and death works a heck of a lot better in life and business. It does, because we're universally wired in this human operating system to navigate the world a certain way. And when you get an insight into that, and I'll say this too, Mike, and this might help set up the rest of the discussion on the book, is that what I say is that really in our human nature, the human operating system, we're meaning-seeking, emotional, social storytellers who struggle. Meaning, emotion, social connection, storytelling, and struggle are 5 critical components of getting big stuff done when nobody's coming.
Yeah.
And so each chapter in the book is built around that, is meaning, emotion, social, storytelling, and struggle, and how to use them to your advantage for authentic influence.
Yeah, I'm with you. All right. So talk about lead from the rooftop. I love this, by the way. Love this. I told you this before we hit record, but go ahead. So lead from the rooftop.
Yeah, it's a metaphor, but it was something that I discovered in Afghanistan when we were losing the war. We needed a new approach, and there were more Taliban in the rural areas than when we started. And a lot of the Green Berets at the time in special operations, we were very focused on kinetic targeting and surgical strike, living on these fire bases next to the village. Instead, we moved into the village. We grew our beards out. We donned indigenous garb and kind of a modern day Lawrence of Arabia meets the Magnificent Seven. And we lived and worked in these communities, helping the Afghans stand up on their own. And right out of the gate, we made them 3 promises: is if you don't want us here, we'll leave. If you work with us, it's going to get harder before it gets easier, because they're going to come for you and us. And then when they do, is we're going to go up on the rooftop and we're going to fight them.
Yeah.
And what would happen invariably every time is, sure enough, within a day or two of us getting into the community, the Taliban would attack. Our team would go up those bamboo ladders and fight on the rooftop of their compound inside the village, and there'd be nobody else up there. And they would endure heavy fire. In many cases, they would have to withhold fire because they couldn't get a good shot, and the Taliban would literally set up firing positions at the base of these homes of the people that we were trying to protect. And then we would just go up and down those ladders every night until at some point during the day, these teams would go out and engage farmers. They would do medical care. They would help with crop, answers on low-tech farming, and just focus on building relationships. And then eventually, 2 or 3 weeks in, you'd see a muzzle flash from a rifle on another rooftop, and it wouldn't be our teammate. It would be a farmer up there just standing up for his house and decided to, on wobbly knees to go up there and fight. And then before long, you've got 4 farmers, and then 5, and then the entire village is returning fire the way they've always done. But now they're doing it not because they have to do it, because they choose to do it. And that level of collective social capital of leaders who go up the rooftop even when nobody follows, and who build rapport when risk is low, that's what I call rooftop leadership. And I found that it is truly a metaphor for the churn that we live in here today. That type of approach to leadership, it's what enabled us to do Pineapple. It's what enabled me to do the play. And I think it is available to anybody who feels stuck right now in that churn, and what got them here isn't getting them there, and they're looking for a new move. This is it.
If you're the leader, you got to go do the deed ahead of everybody else, right? They're going to follow you, but you got to go get after it.
You do. You have to model, I believe. And I think this is true because a lot of people will say, well, what are we supposed to do about all these congressional leaders and these institutional leaders? I mean, we can't do anything about this. No, that's not true. Modeling what right looks like. When Monty asked me at one point, my wife, when everything was going down in Pineapple, she said, why are we doing this? We're losing our business. We're losing our clients. You could possibly go to jail. Like, why are you doing this? And I said, because our kids are watching us. Yeah. Our boys are watching us right now. One of them's a lieutenant in the Army, one's in federal law enforcement, one's in college, but they're watching what we do. And we need to model what right looks like right now in this moment. And I believe, honestly, that the same is true with our politicians and our media leaders. We can model what right looks like, and then we can either shame them into doing the right thing or vote them out. Right. Once, there is a super majority in this United States, they call it the exhausted majority. Two-thirds of Americans are getting very tired of the jackassery that's going on right now. And I think we are on the cusp of a real upswing of citizens leading from the bottom up. And I'm hoping that this book will be a tool set for them. But yeah,
I believe it will be.
You have to model it, and you have to be willing to do it, frankly, at great cost.
Yeah, I agree with that. 100%. Talk about meaning or the mandate to make sense.
Well, just that. I mean, one of the things that I bring into this book is I bring both the science and the art.
Yeah.
Right. That's what makes craft of leadership useful. And so I bring both the science and the art. And the science is There's a lot of research in the last 5 years about the fact that humans are meaning-seeking, meaning-assigning creatures. Dr. Kendall Haven says that the brain has a mandate to make sense of the world. We're the only mammals that do that. So we're constantly trying to make sense of things at a semi-conscious level. So as leaders, if you're not integrating purpose and meaning into everything you do in ambiguity, you are leaving tons of human capital on the table. And I think it's no accident that you see such low disengagement scores. I think that you see the quiet quitting, the talent tsunami, all of those, massive migrations of talent are a straight up absence of purpose. And that's a leadership problem. Leaders, I think, need to get reacquainted with meaning in their own lives, in the lives of the people they lead and their organizations.
Did you mention in your book that like 68% of workers are disengaged at work?
85, somewhere between, depending on the poll, 68 to 85% of workers report to, and that includes managers.
That is just unreal.
It's unbelievable. And some of those surveys are pre-COVID, you don't have to look far to see that. And the absence of, look, I'll tell you another thing to check out that's really good. It's dated a little bit, but Simon Sinek is absolutely right. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And if you haven't watched his talk lately, I think it's called Start With Why. It's a TED talk, very early TED talk. He breaks down the neuroscience of why purpose trumps everything else. And in the military, when we give a mission statement, it doesn't matter if it's an F-16 sortie into Syria or if it's a truck convoy to Camp Lejeune. There are two components of every mission statement: task and purpose. What and why. The American fighting warrior will do anything and accomplish any mission if she knows the answers to what and why. And that is true, I believe, of our associates, our employees, our kids, our travel ball teams. But leaders are not clear. They're not clear on their own why. They're not clear on their own purpose because they're so caught up in the churn. And if the leader's not clear, ain't nobody coming.
And if the leader can pull out of the person they're in charge of, right? If they can pull out of them the purpose that is right, let it be their decision, let it come out of their mouth, they own it. They own it.
They do. And that's right. That's exactly right. And that's why I say in the book, there's a chapter in there about my dad and what he called leaving tracks and just getting clear on the legacy that each of us is meant to leave, the indelible footprints we want to leave in this earth. And if you do that, there's no ceiling for you, but it's hard, and it requires us taking the armor off and really taking a hard look at ourselves. And it feels clunky, but it's the first step in this book. That's why meaning is first, because we are meaning seeking, meaning assigning creatures. The brain has a mandate to make sense of the world. And if we don't acknowledge that at the center of what we're doing as leaders, we're wasting our time. Everything is transactional, and you're going to get what you pay for.
And as a leader, you've got to be authentic. And a big part of being authentic is you've got to be vulnerable, right? You've got to be willing to step up and say, look, I came up short here, just like you did in Paraguay. Okay. I came up short here, right? Well, follow me, right? And you had a dinner date that night, and you got you got your area, right?
That's right.
Okay, let's talk about emotion, how to navigate a shovel fight. I love this.
Oh
I love this.
That's I saw that happen in real time, and it was a very nasty thing where a tribal feud evolved into this horrible, fight over water where grown men were swinging shovels at each other's heads in Afghanistan. But the manifestation of it was pure emotion, right? We are the most emotional creatures on the planet. We navigate the world using emotion. And the one thing too, Mike, that's probably worth mentioning is that when I teach the human operating system, I use the iceberg as a metaphor for the human operating system. And the tip of the iceberg is the modern world. And it feels like that's everything we know about the world. It's our cell phones, it's binge watching Yellowstone, it's 24/7 news, the election. But the reality is that tip of the iceberg is only a fraction of our humanity. It's only a couple hundred years old. Below the waterline is this much older element of our human nature. It's probably 80% of who we are. And my whole premise is the human operating system that we need to inform and influence the tip of the iceberg is below that waterline. They're invisible. So then taking that, that is the meaning seeking, emotional, social storyteller who struggles. Going back to emotion, In the tip of the iceberg world, what do we do with emotion? We stuff it down.
Yeah.
Emotion is not a part of what we do, right? We bury it. With someone cries at work when they say farewell to someone, when they're recognizing them for their achievement, they'll say, "What? I'm sorry."
Yeah.
You know, we're actually conditioned to remove ourselves from emotion. It's killing our veterans. It's killing our kids. And emotions are part and parcel of how we navigate the world, but we have to regulate those emotions so that they are appropriate for the first world problems that we face. In other words, a shovel fight over water might be appropriate if someone's trying to steal your water and your family has no water. Like,
Right.
I hate to say it, but that might be an appropriate response. It's not appropriate when the marketing department doesn't give you full credit for an idea. Right. A shovel fight's not appropriate, but yet the amygdala, the primal part of our brain, doesn't know the difference. So we go into this trance-like state of anger. Anger makes us, and we do things that are completely inappropriate for an election, for a first, and we end up losing a friend. And so emotional temperature is at the heart of that chapter. And what I try to really help people understand is what emotional temperature is, what it means for you and the people you lead, and how to manage emotional temperature as the first order of business in every negotiation that you do. And if you don't, it's not going to matter how good a negotiator you are, because emotions trump everything when someone is in a trance state. And if you can't get that emotional temperature down where the other party's ready to listen, you're irrelevant.
1000%. 1000%. Okay. Talk about social or connect like your life depends on it.
Right. So in Afghanistan, I told you, like, if we go into a place, we have to make a connection or we're dead. Right.
Yeah.
But my point is, what if we all took that mentality? We're so casual about our connections today in this tip of the iceberg world. Everything's transactional. It's all superficial, and we don't really value relationships. Even relationship managers in banks are usually, young 20-somethings who've never been taught anything about relationships in terms of what they actually look like dynamically at a biological level. And so, to me, it's about how do we change the mindset of connection to where we really see it as a superpower. Matthew Lieberman says that our ability to connect, because we don't have fur, fangs, or claws, is our superpower.
Yeah.
But because of the 2+ years of COVID, our skills have atrophied dramatically. And the churn has actually insidiously moved us away from human connection as a tendency. We tend to isolate more. And so what this chapter is about is reacquainting the reader with the importance of a form of capital that most of us dismiss, which is social capital.
And I would submit something to you. Because of COVID and because of the churn, it's more important than it's ever been.
100%.
It's more valued than it's ever been.
And the people who get that are the ones that are going to own every room they go into. And by own every room, here's what I mean. They're going to be more relatable to the pain of the people they serve, and they're going to be more relevant to their goals. And here's a newsflash. That's what every single one of us follows, particularly when it's hard.
Yeah.
We follow the leader who is relatable to our pain and relevant to our goals. And if each one of these letters allows that to happen more effectively. Valuing social capital, your relationship portfolio, is a really important thing. And that chapter is probably the longest chapter, Mike, because I go into a lot of best practices of how Green Berets have used social connection to their advantage and how you can translate them into your life.
Yeah, it's awesome. Okay, storytelling.
Oh, my favorite. My favorite. It is the medium by which we navigate the world. The brain is a metaphorical pattern matching organ below the waterline. That's what the brain does. It uses metaphor to make sense of the world with that make sense mandate, which means storytelling is a sense making tool. But yet in this world of churn that we live in this tip of the iceberg world, we've diluted story. We've gone in favor of PowerPoint, where David Phillips in his research, Death by PowerPoint, hooked people up to EEG machines and found that your audience on average forgets 90% of your content 30 seconds after you say thank you for your time. And the reason is because PowerPoint and other forms of short form data-based communication affect working memory, not long-term memory. They do not provide context. They do not address meaning, and they do not accelerate trust or emotional connection. Storytelling does all that.
Yep.
And the good news is we are all innate, instinctive storytellers, but it's been buried under years of churn. So that chapter opens the reader up to the story animal that is inside them and all of the cool things that are accessible to them with story.
Yeah.
And gives them examples and ways to build their stories and tell them powerfully.
It's why we do this podcast.
You're a great storyteller. And that's what, but the fact that you start off with backstory, because one of the things that we've learned through, and I study this big time, but one of the things that we've learned is that the reason that you want a backstory, that you want an origin story as a leader, is because it's the fastest way that the other party gets a sense of who you are.
Yeah.
And when someone gets a sense of who you are, they start to get a sense of who they are.
That's it.
Right? It feels psychologically safe. We feel connected, and we start to have a shared future together, which is incredibly important in this time of churn. So again, storytelling, if you just take that chapter and just follow some of the tenets of how to design and deliver powerful stories, just try it, test it, and watch what happens.
Yeah.
I mean, it's game changing.
Yeah, it's a big deal. So talk about struggle.
It's a biological necessity.
Yeah.
According to Daniel Coyle in the Little Book of Talent. And the reason is because it's what happens when the brain is presented with new data or new challenges. It has to build neural pathways that weren't there. Yeah. And that clunky, awful feeling is by definition struggle. Yeah. So struggle is not something that happens to a few unlucky souls. It's actually something that happens to all of us. And it is what I call in storytelling a universal singular. Yep. In other words, everybody struggles. And so it's a trust accelerant. It makes you immediately relatable. Yeah. And so if you combine story and struggle, the generosity of scars, repurposing your struggles in the service of others, now it is the highest level of authentic influence. And to your point, you can reverse engineer it, and you can actually ask thoughtful, open-ended questions that allow the other party to share their struggles. Yeah. And you listen with pure curiosity and discovery, and you will accelerate your relatability and relevance in any situation. Yeah. Right. And it gets the other party ready to listen at the same time. You're not even having to do much except just listen with intention. But
so it's the two cardinal rules, right? Stay in curiosity, stay out of judgment.
100%.
And
let's struggle, invite struggle to the party.
Yeah.
Right. Don't be afraid, and don't try to dilute it, because that's what we do in the tip of the iceberg world. We try to make it look like struggle's not there. Leaders are like, here's 3 ways to be great like me. Yeah. And it's unwatchable. We don't like it. People don't like that. People actually locate the first place a listener locates a storyteller is in struggle. It's the first time we identify with them. And if you don't like the word vulnerability, use relatability, because that's actually what we're after as humans. We're not trying to be vulnerable to another human. We're actually trying to relate to another human. Yeah. So I tell folks, look, if you want to, as a boss and one of your employees just made a mistake, how can I be relatable to them right now? Right. And by doing that, you will automatically demonstrate the appropriate level of vulnerability.
That's it. And that's where your connection comes from. Yeah. Right. Yeah. That's where you connect. And again, that's that below the water surface, right? Yeah. The 85% of the mass of the iceberg.
And nobody does it.
Exactly.
Nobody does it. So if you do it, and it's got to be for the right reasons, and we talk all about that in the book, but it'll feel clunky, it'll feel awkward, but if you just test it in lower risk situations, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. Talk about your conclusion, the rise of the exhausted majority. I know we've talked a little bit about it, but talk a little bit about it real quick.
In the early 1900s, there was a time period where the country was very similar to where we are right now. You had the haves and the have-nots, the political division, infrastructure was falling apart, and many of the pundits were saying that America was on its last days. And a couple of drunks in Akron, Ohio, Dr. Bob and Bill W., couldn't get sober. All the institutional programs had failed them, and they said, nobody's coming to save us. Let's have a meeting. And they called it Alcoholics Anonymous, right? And years later, millions of people have gotten sober as a result of that grassroots getting big stuff done kind of play, including this guy, sober 24 years as a result of that meeting that happened in Akron, Ohio. It wasn't just Alcoholics Anonymous that happened during this time period of the early 1900s. The Junior League, the Rotary Club, the Elks Club, the NAACP, Future Farmers of America, pretty much every bottom-up social organization that was that kind of rooftop movement that we knew as kids and that our parents were part of until 1972, the longest running period of social capital in American history from 1910 to 1972 happened with this upswing in social capital that Robert Putnam talks about. And I believe personally, but what I saw with the Afghan withdrawal and groups like Pineapple and others, I believe that was the first big move of another upswing. I think what you saw our veterans do signaled, like what you're building with your podcast and what so many other Americans and frankly leaders around the world who are part of this exhausted majority. They are actually a super majority and they're starting to figure it out. The reality is the divisionists have the microphones right now, but they are the minority and they are terrified of guys like you and me getting the microphones. Because they know that spells the reemergence of an empowered majority. And I'm not talking about insurrection or rebellion. I'm talking about good grassroots civic social actions by responsible leaders who say nobody else is coming, I'll do it and I'll do the best I can. And that's, I think, where we are. And again, the idea here is that this book is simply a tool set to help people who are already heading that direction, because the churn that they're facing is so novel that you need the kind of Green Beret tools that we used in those undergoverned places. And if you have that, I think you got a really good chance of getting big stuff done.
No, I couldn't agree more. 1000%. I love this book. I can't put it down. I'm completely addicted to it. I'm thinking about you 24/7. I mean, I'm like obsessed. I started, I'm not joking. I finished a book this morning, and this is just anecdotal, but I finished a book this morning that I really enjoyed. I liked it. And I ended up for the 9th or 10th time starting back reading Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. And he's talking about how the FBI, and I'm literally at the very beginning again, right? Chapter 1, where he's talking about the history, and he's talking about how the FBI decided to stop talking at hostage takers and start asking them questions, right? Tactical empathy, the whole thing. And I'm literally reading that. I'm literally listening to that on my workout this morning, and I'm thinking about you. I mean, it's like, I'm reading this in your book, So
and Chris and I arrived at that complete, I've never met him. I'm a big fan. I've read his work diligently. We've arrived at that conclusion very independently. I arrived at that working with elders in tribal areas that were very hostile. And he's absolutely right. In fact, I've integrated some of his stuff like calibrated questions and questions that start with what and how. And I'm glad to hear that you've synthesized it that way. That's absolutely right.
Yeah, you can see it. You can see it in your book. And people have got to get this book. They have got to get this book, and they've got to read it. And I would submit to you, they need to gift it to some people they care about.
And we have a really cool, if you go to scottmann.com, there's a really cool gift box that we're doing where if you get a signed copy of the book from me, but it's about, I think it's about $100, but you also get a pen that was made. It's a bullet pen. It's called a Pen with Purpose. And it's made by Jeff Falkel. He's a Gold Star father. And Jeff and his son, Junior, would go out to their garage. Their hobby was to make things out of shell casings together. They made all kinds of things, but they could never make a bullet pen. They always tried. And when Junior was killed in combat, Jeff went out into the garage and he stayed out there until he figured out how to make that pen. And so Jeff and I have become really good friends. And so I just thought, Jeff, there's nobody better to signify this movement than you and Junior and this pen. So like, could we do something? And so when you buy that gift box, you're also contributing to, the proceeds for that go to the Green Beret Foundation and some really cool things. But if you want to check it out. It's really, really cool. And if the other thing I would just say too, Mike, I do take this seriously. This is a movement. And this is a lifetime body of work. It's a craft. And if you like what's in the book, I put stuff out. I've got a Patreon page where we go deep on this behind the scenes. And also twice a year, we do a workshop where we go out in the woods at a dude ranch called Own Every Room. and we train around the fire pit on these old school skills. It's a very intimate setting, but I've got business owners, politicians, generals that come to this thing, teachers, and they learn how to tell their story with me. But it is my body of work, man. Like for the rest of my time on this earth is to help leaders who recognize that nobody's coming to save them and they still want to get big stuff done, to pour myself into them. So if I can ever help, all that stuff's on scottmann.com. And thank you for getting people dialed into the book, because I do think it's the starting point.
Yeah, I do too. And I'm so incredibly excited to be a part of this movement with you. In anything I can do to help and to get the word out and make this thing happen, I'm all in. So
that's amazing, brother. Thank you.
Thank you so much, man. I cannot thank you enough for being our guest on the Mike Litton Experience. This has been a blast.
Thanks, Mike. God bless.
We hope you enjoyed another episode of the Mike Litton Experience. If you did, do us a favor, smash that subscribe button, tell your friends, family, and coworkers about our program, and wherever you get your podcasts, please leave us a rating. It helps us to connect with quality people just like you.
And that's a wrap. Another episode of the Mike Litton Experience in the books. Reach out to Mike on Instagram at Litton Realty. Want to meet with Mike? Check out calendly.com/Rio760.